we're going to do another book thing on this, The Modest Achievements of Meddleton High. This is, I believe, a self-published book. I picked it up in one of the little free libraries, but it comes, I don't know if it's actually self-published. It comes with this little thing. If you enjoyed this promotional copy, but it's available, well, it's available through Amazon, both in paperback and ebook. I don't know, you know. It appears to be self-published. There's no publishing company or anything. But before we get to that, this just showed up. I finished one, and I got the next one here, and this is going to be a Levian campaign based on the War of the Roses. We're going to wait a little bit before we get to it. Let other people do their coverage first or whatever. No reason to try to get things out as soon as possible. And also, I want to break from it. And I got a couple of games that I'm planning to do before that. Anyway, to the book. So this is written by a guy. I actually read his little blurbs. Usually about the author is like, you know, a paragraph or so, because he's writing it for himself in his own book, whatever. He does like a page and a half, which actually I find kind of cool. I often find that knowing the perspective of an author is very, very helpful. And much as I expected, this guy has taught high school, but he also had sort of a journalist career before that, and also as a musician and all kind of stuff, bumbling around throughout a lot of stuff. It seems like an interesting lifespan in there. But when I picked this up, I thought it was going to be a young adult book. I didn't really look too carefully about it, but the print on the back, the nature, the size of it, everything just kind of screamed that to me. And I'm like, you know, this looks cute and funny. So I did pick it up and hauled it home on one of my shopping trips. And it wasn't what I expected. Again, it's written from, it's basically starts out as, and I was almost convinced this is all it was, as a satire of the current state of teaching. Now, it turns out there is a story within it, but the main framework of the story is to provide you with this sort of satirical look at, you know, how teaching is nowadays. Particularly of interest to me because I you know, engaged with someone online, not in a bad way or anything, but someone had posted, you know, how teachers have to buy their own supplies and everything, and I kind of like, you know, that's kind of bullshit. I mean, what supplies are there? What are actually needed? And what I was able to tease out is that, yeah, some of the students aren't prepared and maybe need to borrow pencils or whatever, and they don't come back, right? And paper and all that stuff. I still think that isn't reasonable, but like, in terms of the school should be supplying a certain amount of stuff perhaps, but it is a little different from that. But this is kind of, you know, like I said, it's a satire, so it's taking it to an extreme. And on the back, there's a couple of key things that are handled in the satire itself. Unlock America's Genius Act, which is just basically, you know, test-driven teaching all the way across the board. And, you know, the standardized tests are all multiple choice. They don't give you a lot of opportunity to demonstrate any kind of learning or anything. And more than that, the students aren't held responsible for their test scores. Only the school and the teachers are. But it's considered like the main thing that the schools are there for. And, you know, I mean, we're not that far from that in a lot of ways. But underfunded to the point where the teachers pay classroom electric bills and have to seek out business sponsors. But let's see, what else do we have? We have a mysterious mutant flu bug, which is rather devastating, and some of the reactions to it are somewhat prescient. Now, this was written in 2017, before the pandemic, and you can kind of see some of the views, although not really the public backlash against, like, you know, against dealing with a pandemic or anything, which kind of a pity, you know, he didn't predict that. But the actual story itself, you know, it ends on kind of a good note and all that, but honestly, one of the big factors in it, which maybe is hinted at here somewhere, yeah, there's some guns here, is that, you know, they're arming the teachers, and it's not just, you know, teachers can volunteer to be armed support or whatever. It actually becomes a mandatory thing at this school. Just a whole bunch of stuff along those lines, where it's taking what we're seeing right now and extending it, maybe not to the logical extreme, maybe a little beyond that. But in terms of a satire, I don't know how terribly well it does. In terms of a story within that, it's okay, and it makes its point. I mean, that's sort of the key to the satire, but it's not quite. I don't know. It's not quite written in the nature of Swift, right? But anyway, I thought I'd call this out. It was readable. It was enjoyable enough. And it does kind of highlight, you know, some of the factors that teachers are struggling with in terms of trying to exist in a world where schools are becoming more and more corporatized. I mean, you got fucking Pizza Hut and whatever serving food now in the schools. You got soda machines in the schools. They didn't used to have that shit. You know, just all kinds of things that it's like, wow, yeah, I've seen shots of this stuff, and it's really fucked up when it comes down to it. Anyway, I'm not going to say a hell of a lot about it. It was an enjoyable enough read. I'm going to pass it along as it was passed to me via the little library system. But it was kind of neat to see something covering this from the teacher's point of view. It's easier to deal with, you know, like I wouldn't have picked up even, you know, a well-known author's discussion of the problems of school or whatever, but something along this line was a more enjoyable way to deliver these kind of thoughts to my head in terms of how we deal, you know, with our public education and everything. One of the real big things, and this isn't satire at all, unfortunately, is that essentially the conservative anti-public school movement is really just that. Like, I call it that blindly what it is, but that is what it is. They're attempting to wreck the public school systems so that for-profit schools and religious schools become the norm. And they've gone quite a long way towards that. You know, there's a potential for granting a great deal, yeah, there's a potential for economies of scale when you're dealing with the public school system. But then, when you're looking at schools that don't necessarily have to get accredited teachers in some states, that they can grossly underpay the teaching faculty, and that really, control the curriculum that they're going to have, and present things that, aren't really going to help you, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is and they also self-select in a lot of cases by taking, the wealthiest families' children, because the vouchers and whatnot don't cover the full costs involved in the way that the public school does. So they kind of cut corners in every direction, are able to make a profit off of that, and are able to teach either in an ideological fashion or to provide the smaller class sizes and whatnot that the public school has always wanted, through different mechanisms. Anyway, the state of teaching is just horrible right now. The lack of valuation of our education system is just, it's a joke, and it's very sad, and it's all also that goes all the way up into the university systems too. I mean, they've lost what they used to be, and become something. They've become they've become what used to be performed by on-the-job training. It used to be you got out of your high school degree, if you managed to get through with that, the job itself would teach you what you needed to do for that job. Because you were assumed to be trainable. And it's not like the training that's happening in the university system is all that high. Like, I mean, I came out of school when I entered the workforce, really looking for a career, and something that 15 years ago or whatever. I don't feel like I used a hell of a lot of the stuff that I learned in school. I really don't. And certainly not what I learned in graduate school. The jobs that were available were not particularly concerned with the stuff that I was dealing with in that light. Certainly aspects have influenced certain parts of my work, but they weren't at all necessary. Nobody else who was doing my job was using, some of the stuff that I knew about, right? And these were also people who probably, I know a fair number of them also had postgraduate degrees, and just didn't have to draw it in. Anyway, someday or another we'll do a real rant on education, but I just wanted to highlight this. This is, I mean, I can't tell people to go buy something because I wouldn't buy it. I found this an enjoyable way of taking a look at a teacher's perspective in a satirical form. And nothing fantastic. Probably shouldn't need to highlight it or whatever, but enjoyable enough to, be my reading for a couple of days.